The headline of this article by Alan McLeod kind of says it all, and it's obviously hugely disgusting and disturbing on so many levels. Anger over Israeli uh, Israeli decision to demolish Palestinian COVID-19 hospital ahead of deadly second wave. This shows clearly that Israel doesn't care about Palestinian lives. They can't even give us our basic rights to healthcare so we can treat our people from the coronavirus. Taysir Abdu Sinaya, mayor of Hebron, I apologize if I butchered that name, which I very well have, by Alan McLeod of Mint Press News. I'll link below. The Israeli decision to bulldoze a newly built COVID-19 field hospital and testing center in Hebron in the West Bank yesterday has been roundly condemned by activists, rights groups, and organizers. Quote, because demolishing a COVID-19 testing center is totally the best way for Israel to be spending funds right now, wrote female-led anti-war group Code Pink. Seriously, this obsession with destroying Palestine, even at the expense of Israeli coronavirus funding, is sick. 3 days ago, Israeli occupation forces delivered a demolition order to a COVID-19 clinic / testing center at northern entrance of Hebron City. Hebron? The clinic was supported by Hebron municipality. Hebron is hardest hit COVID area in, I'm assuming that's OPT, occupied Palestine, maybe? This morning, Israeli forces demolished the clinic. Again, it's like, really, like that person from Code Pink pointed out, this is the best of use of Israeli funds right now to demolish this COVID-19 clinic for Palestinians. It's disgusting. Around 250,000 had been raised to fund the new center, which was being built in memory of the grandfather of 35-year-old engineer Raed Maswada, whose family donated the land for that purpose. Maswada's grandfather had recently died from the coronavirus himself. Maswada told journalists from Middle East Eye that Israel's soldiers had been watching its construction for months without saying anything. Then, last week, they were told to produce building permits for the field hospital, something virtually impossible to receive from the Israeli government, otherwise it would be destroyed. Taysir Abdu Sania, mayor of Hebron, was outraged. We're in the middle of a global crisis. This is an emergency situation. You would think they would show some empathy or give people some leave. Exactly. Like, okay, it doesn't have the permit. Let us help you get this. We're in the middle of a freaking pandemic. Kind of awesome that you're building a hospital. Let's maybe work with you instead of demolishing it, you sick fucks. I mean, Jesus Christ. Or give. But they're not interested in that, he said. This shows clearly that Israel doesn't care about Palestinian lives. Obviously, that's clearly the only conclusion you can draw from this disgusting act. They can't even give us our basic rights to healthcare so we can treat our people from the coronavirus. The lack of a response from Western government angered many. Ali Abdu Nima, co-founder of the Electronic Intifada, complained that there was not a word from European Union on the bulldozing of an emergency hospital. Quote, do not let the EU launder its complicity and support for Israel war crimes with crumbs of charity thrown at Palestinians yet. I mean, again, I don't know how you could not say that is a war crime. Literally destroying a hospital in the middle of a pandemic. Really. The coronavirus situation in the region appears to be spiraling out of control. Having seemingly successfully managed the outbreak, Israel has unmistakably hit a second wave of infections, far worse than what had come before. At the height of the epidemic in early April, the country was averaging around 600 new cases per day. Yesterday, 2,039 Israelis tested positive for the coronavirus. Wow. Palestine is similar, losing its grip on the situation, with 57 of a total of 64 declared Palestinians dying in July. Yesterday, Nikolai Maldanoff, the United Nations Special Coordinator for Middle East Peace Process, warned that the dramatic increase in cases could have perilous consequences for the region, calling for new extraordinary measures to fight the virus spread. The destruction of health clinics was presumably exactly the opposite of what he intended, you would think, right? While perhaps shocking, Israel's latest move did not surprise many knowledgeable onlookers because, again, they've been It's an apartheid state, and Israel is able to get away with this largely because of the massive support that they get from the United States. And it's disgusting, and it needs to be condemned. In March, Israeli forces did the same thing to a new field hospital in the West Bank community of Kirbet Ibzik, bulldozing buildings and confiscating medical supplies and construction. And again, March, kind of right when all this stuff was happening, as the whole world battles an unprecedented and paralyzing healthcare crisis, Israel's military is devoting time and resources to harassing the most vulnerable Palestinian communities in the West Bank that Israel has attempted to drive out of the area for decades, wrote local human rights group Tessalem, shutting down a first aid community initiative during a health crisis, an especially cruel example of the regular abuse inflicted on these communities, and it goes against basic human and humanitarian principles during an emergency. It definitely does. Benjamin Netanyahu's government recently announced plans to formally annex up to a third of Palestine, including much of the fertile Jordan Valley, the breadbasket of Palestine. Based on Trump and his son-in-law Jared Kushner's so-called deal of the century, the plan would put over 70,000 extra Palestinians under full Israeli jurisdiction. The United Nations High Commissioner on Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, has declared the annexation plans both illegal and disastrous. Dr. Ramzi Baroud, a Palestinian-American journalist, recently told Mint Press that people in the West Bank are already under complete Israeli control and all movement and freedoms are already curtailed for Palestine. It's an apartheid state. It's an apartheid state. But that the Trump-Netanyahu plan would make the situation even worse. It'd be the last nail in the coffin in the so-called peace process, he warned. Again, it's an apartheid state. The Palestinian people are just brutally repressed in so many ways by the Israeli government. And, they're largely, again, able to get away with it because of the unconditional support that the U.S. government provides Israel and the massive amount of, military aid that we give them as well. I mean, for fuck's sake, they're demolishing hospitals during a pandemic. It's disgusting. This needs to be called out and condemned. All solidarity with the Palestinian people who've been, facing this brutal repression by the Israeli government for way too long. Peace. Much love.